The morning sky above Earth burned with alien fire as massive ships descended through the clouds. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of New Horizons Station, watching the impossible sight unfold before his eyes. 20 years of military service had prepared him for many things, but not this. "Sir, they're requesting permission to dock," said Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. She was one of the best officers Jake had ever served with, a former Navy SEAL who never showed fear. "Grant them docking." "Bay 7, Jake replied, straightening his uniform. Today would change everything for humanity. Dr. Lisa Grant hurried onto the bridge, her tablet clutched in her hands. As Earth's chief scientist studying alien life, she had spent years dreaming of this moment. Now that it was here, she felt more nervous than excited. "The translation software is ready," she announced. "We can communicate with them." Jake nodded. Through the viewport, he could see the alien ship growing larger as it approached. It was unlike anything humans had ever built, smooth black metal that seemed to absorb light, with curves that hurt to look at for too long. The docking process took an hour. When the airlock finally opened, Jake got his first look at Earth's visitors. The aliens were enormous, standing nearly 8 feet tall. Their bodies were covered in thick, dark plates that looked like natural armor. 4 arms extended from there. Broad shoulders, each ending in hands with razor-sharp claws. Their faces were hidden behind helmets that gleamed like polished stone. The leader stepped forward and spoke. The translation device turned his words into English, but the voice remained cold and mechanical. "I am Commander Zethkar of the Kraxi Empire. You are humans, yes?" "Yes," Jake replied. "I am Captain Jake Morrison. Welcome to our space station." Zethkar looked around the docking bay with obvious disappointment. His head turned slowly, taking in every detail. When his gaze returned to Jake, there was something like contempt in his posture. "Your technology is primitive," the alien commander said. "Your people are small and weak, but perhaps you can still be useful." Dr. Grant stepped forward, her scientific excitement overcoming her nervousness. "We would love to learn about your civilization. This is a historic moment for both our species." "Historic?" Zethkar made a sound that might have been laughter. "Child, your species has barely left its home world. You know nothing of the galaxy or its dangers." Jake felt his jaw tighten. He had dealt with arrogant officers before, but something about this alien's attitude set him on edge. "Perhaps you could tell us why you've come here." "The galaxy is at war," Zethkar explained, his forearms moving in complex gestures. "The Vorth swarm consumes everything in its path. Entire worlds have been devoured. Billions have died. The Galactic Defense Coalition fights to survive." "And you want our help?" Lisa asked. "Help?" The alien commander turned to look at her. Even through his helmet, his contempt was clear. "Humans cannot help. You are too weak, too soft. But you can serve." Jake felt the temperature in the room seem to drop. "Serve how?" "The coalition needs soldiers. Many soldiers. Your people will join our armies and fight the Vorth. Some will die, but this is necessary." "Wait just a minute," Jake said, stepping closer to the towering alien. "You can't just demand that we send our people to fight your war." Zethkar looked down at him. The size difference made Jake feel like a child confronting an adult. "You misunderstand, human. This is not a request. This is how things will be." Lisa moved to stand beside Jake. "Our leaders will need to discuss this." "We can't make such decisions without. Your leaders will agree," Zethkar interrupted. "They are wise enough to understand their position." Over the next several hours, Jake watched as the alien delegation was escorted through the station. They showed no interest in human achievements. The advanced computers that had taken decades to develop earned only dismissive glances. The weapons that represented humanity's best military technology were ignored completely. When they reached the conference room, President Helen Carter was waiting via video link from Earth. Jake had served under 3 presidents, but Helen Carter was different. She was tough, smart, and never backed down from a fight. Today, however, she looked worried. "Commander Zethkar," the president began, "we appreciate your visit, but we need to understand what you're asking of us." "I ask nothing," the alien replied. "I inform you of reality. The Vorth will reach this sector within 5 years. When they arrive, they will consume your world and everyone on it. Your only chance of survival is to join the coalition. And the price of membership? Soldiers. Your people will serve in our armies. Those who survive will earn their species a place in the galaxy." President Carter was quiet for a long moment. Jake could see her weighing impossible choices. Finally, she spoke. "We'll need to see proof of your claims about this Vorth threat, and we'll need time to prepare our people." "Time you do not have," Zethkar said, "but I am not unreasonable. Send a small force first. Let them prove that humans can be useful. If they succeed, perhaps better terms can be arranged." Jake felt his heart sink. He knew what the president would decide. Earth had no choice. "How many soldiers?" Carter asked. 200 will be sufficient for testing. Your strongest warriors." Jake found himself speaking before he realized it. "I'll lead them." Everyone in the room turned to look at him. Zethkar's helmet tilted slightly, as if studying an interesting insect. "You? You are old for a warrior, human, and small, even for your species." "I'm experienced," Jake replied, "and I know how to lead very well. Gather your 200 weakest soldiers. We will see how long they survive." As the alien delegation prepared to leave, Jake felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He would have to choose 200 people to send into an unknown war against an enemy they had never seen. Some of them would not come home. Dr. Grant approached him as the aliens departed. "Jake, are you sure about this?" He watched through the viewport as the alien ship pulled away from the station. Its dark hull reflected no light, making it look like a hole cut out of space itself. "No," he admitted, "but someone has to do it. And maybe we'll surprise them?" Lisa looked doubtful. "How?" "They have technology centuries ahead of ours. They're stronger, faster, better armed." Jake smiled grimly. "They think they know everything about us after one meeting. But they've never seen humans when our backs are against the wall." Within a week, volunteers began arriving at New Horizons Station. They came from every branch of Earth's military. Marines, Army Rangers, Navy SEALs, Air Force Special Operations. The best and bravest humanity had to offer. Among them was Sergeant Amy Rodriguez, whose steady nerves had caught Jake's attention years earlier. Corporal Dan Williams arrived from the Army Corps of Engineers, carrying a toolkit that seemed to contain solutions to any mechanical problem. Lieutenant Sam Foster came from the Marines, a young officer with an uncanny ability to keep his soldiers. Focused under pressure. As Jake looked at the assembled volunteers, he felt a mixture of pride and fear. These men and women were about to face something beyond human experience. They would be tested in ways no human had ever been tested before, but they were ready. They had to be. The alien transport ship arrived exactly 1 week later. As the human soldiers boarded, Jake took one last look at Earth through the station's viewport. The blue marble hung in space, beautiful and fragile. When they returned, if they returned, everything would be different. The journey to Outpost Zarian took 3 days in the alien transport ship. Jake Morrison had traveled in military transports before, but nothing like this. The Croxy ship was built for beings twice the size of humans. The seats were too big, the corridors too wide, and the gravity felt wrong somehow. The human soldiers tried to make the best of it. Sergeant Amy Rodriguez spent her time studying the alien technology, taking notes on everything she saw. Corporal Dan Williams examined the ship's construction, muttering to himself about design principles. Lieutenant Sam Foster kept the younger soldiers calm with jokes and stories. When they finally arrived at Talos Prime, Jake got his first look at an alien world. The planet was brown and rocky, with 2 small suns that cast everything in harsh orange light. Massive military installations covered the surface like metal scars. "Welcome to hell," muttered Private Kelly Brown, a young Marine who had volunteered despite having only 2 years of service. The landing bay was filled with Craxi soldiers. They stood in perfect formation, their dark armor gleaming under the artificial lights. As the humans disembarked, Jake could feel dozens of alien eyes watching them. A Craxi officer approached. He was even larger than Commander Zethkar, with additional armor plates covering his shoulders and chest. "I am General Vexthal," the alien announced. "You humans will follow my orders exactly. Any who fail to obey will be executed." Jake stepped forward. "General, I'm Colonel Morrison. My people are ready to serve, but we need proper equipment. You will speak only when spoken to," Vexthal interrupted. His voice carried a threat that made several of the younger soldiers step back. The humans were marched to their quarters, which turned out to be a storage building that had been hastily converted into barracks. The beds were too large. The food dispensers didn't work properly, and the air recycling system made strange noises all night. "They're treating us like prisoners," complained Sergeant Rodriguez as she tried to adjust her oversized bunk. "Worse than prisoners," said Dan Williams. "At least prisoners get beds that fit." The next morning brought their first training session. The humans were led to an equipment depot where they were issued Craxi weapons and armor. The rifles were nearly 4 feet long and weighed almost 30 pounds. The armor was designed for beings with 4 arms and wouldn't fit human bodies properly. Jake struggled to lift his assigned weapon. It was like trying to carry a small cannon. Around him, the other humans were having similar problems. The Craxi soldiers watching them made sounds that Jake realized were laughter. "Look at the soft skins," one alien said to another. "They cannot even hold a proper weapon." "Perhaps we should give them sticks instead," replied his companion. "It would be more their size." General Vexthal appeared, flanked by his officers. "Begin combat training," he ordered. What followed was 3 hours of humiliation. The humans couldn't move properly in the oversized armor. They couldn't aim the heavy weapons accurately. When they tried to run the obstacle course, most fell down within the first few yards. Jake watched his soldiers struggle and felt anger building in his chest. These were some of Earth's finest warriors, reduced to stumbling around like children, playing dress-up. But as the days passed, Jake began to notice something the aliens missed. His people were adapting. Amy Rodriguez figured out how to modify the armor straps to make the equipment fit better. Dan Williams started taking apart the weapons to understand how they worked. Sam Foster developed new movement techniques that worked with the oversized gear. The Craxi didn't see it because they weren't looking for it. To them, the humans were just entertainment, weak creatures, struggling with equipment too advanced for them to understand. The breakthrough came during the second week. Jake was watching combat drills when he saw Amy Rodriguez do something impossible. She was sparring with a Craxi warrior named Brechter, one of the base's champions. The alien was twice her size and armed with a weapon that could cut through steel. Amy couldn't match his strength or reach, but she didn't try to. Instead, she moved in ways the alien didn't expect. She ducked under his swings, rolled between his legs, and struck at joints in his armor that he couldn't defend. Brechter became frustrated. He was used to fighting opponents who met his attacks head-on. Amy's unpredictable movements confused him. When he swung high, She went low. When he expected her to retreat, she moved closer. The match ended when Amy managed to trip the massive warrior, sending him crashing to the ground. The watching Kraxi fell silent. "Impossible," General Vexthul muttered. No creature that small should be able to defeat Breakter. But Amy had done more than just win a sparring match. She had shown the other humans something important. They didn't have to fight like Kraxi to be effective. Over the following days, the human soldiers began developing their own techniques. They couldn't overpower the aliens, so they learned to outthink them. They couldn't match alien technology, so they found ways to use human ingenuity instead. Dan Williams became a master at modifying equipment. He figured out how to make the heavy Kraxi rifles work with human-sized hands. He found ways to adjust the armor so it protected vital areas without restricting movement. The aliens watched in confusion as their primitive equipment became more effective in human hands. Sam Foster started training sessions that the Kraxi weren't invited to. He taught the human soldiers to work together in ways the aliens had never seen. Where Kraxi fought as individuals, humans fought as a unit. They covered each other's weaknesses and multiplied each other's strengths. The aliens began to notice that something was changing, but they didn't understand what. The humans were still smaller and weaker than Kraxi warriors. Their technology was still primitive. But somehow, they were becoming more dangerous. The tension came to a head during a large training exercise. General Vexthul decided to demonstrate human weakness by having them face a full Kraxi squad in simulated combat. "This will be amusing," he told his officers. "We will show these softskins what real warriors can do." The exercise took place in a mock city built for urban combat training. The humans were given outdated weapons and told to hold a building against Kraxi assault forces. Everyone expected it to be over quickly, but Jake and his soldiers had learned. From weeks of watching alien tactics, they knew how Kraxi thought, how they moved, how they fought. And they had developed countermeasures. When the exercise began, the aliens expected to find humans waiting behind barricades, trying to match firepower with firepower. Instead, they found empty rooms and silence. The humans had abandoned the building entirely. They were using the city's underground maintenance tunnels, moving through areas too small for Kraxi warriors to follow. They struck at the alien forces from unexpected angles, then disappeared before retaliation could come. Amy Rodriguez led a team that sabotaged the aliens' communication equipment. Dan Williams planted simulated explosives that destroyed key Kraxi weapons. Sam Foster coordinated hit-and-run attacks. That kept the enemy constantly off balance. The exercise was supposed to last 2 hours. After 4 hours, the Kraxi forces still hadn't secured their objective. After 6 hours, General Vexthul called a halt. "What happened?" he demanded from his subordinates. How did weak humans defeat trained warriors? None of the Kraxi officers had an answer. They had never seen tactics like the ones the humans used. The idea of abandoning a strong position to fight from hiding was foreign to their military thinking. That night, Jake found General Vexthul waiting in his quarters. A massive alien looked troubled. "Your people fight strangely," the general said. "We fight smart," Jake replied. "We use what we have. You are still weak," Jake smiled. "Maybe, but we're learning." General Vexthul stared at him for a long moment. "The Vorth come soon. When they arrive, we will see if human cleverness can stand against true savagery." As the alien general left, Jake felt a mixture of pride and worry. His soldiers were proving that humans could adapt and overcome. But they hadn't faced real combat yet. The Vorth were coming, and everything they had learned would be put to the ultimate test. The alarm began screaming at 3 in the morning. Jake Morrison was awake instantly, years of military training kicking in before his brain fully processed what was happening. Red lights flashed throughout the human barracks as soldiers scrambled for their equipment. "All units to battle stations," came the announcement in the harsh Craxi language, followed by the mechanical translation. "The Vorth have arrived." Jake had heard stories about the Vorth swarm, but nothing had prepared him for his first glimpse of them through the base's viewing screens. They looked like giant insects, each one the size of a small building. Their bodies were covered in black chitin that seemed to absorb light. Hundreds of legs carried them across the landscape in a wave of destruction that stretched to the horizon. "My God," whispered Lieutenant Sam Foster, staring at the approaching horde. "There are millions of them." Sergeant Amy Rodriguez was already checking her weapon. "How do we fight something like that?" Before Jake could answer, General Vexthul's voice boomed through the communication system. "Human units will hold Sector 7. Do not retreat from your position under any circumstances." Jake looked at the tactical display. Sector 7 was a small outpost on the far edge of the base's defensive perimeter. It was isolated, lightly defended, and directly in the path of the main Vorth assault. "They're sending us to die," said Corporal Dan Williams, his voice flat, with realization. "No," Jake replied, studying the map more carefully. "They're sending us where they think we'll be useless. That gives us something they don't expect." "What's that?" asked Amy. "Freedom to improvise." The human soldiers moved quickly to their assigned position. The outpost was exactly what Jake had expected, a small bunker with basic weapons and minimal supplies. It was designed to delay the enemy for a few minutes while the main base prepared its defenses. But Jake wasn't planning to fight a delaying action. As soon as his people were in position, he gathered his squad leaders. "Forget everything they taught us about holding positions," he said. "We're not going to sit here and let them overrun us. Dan, what can you tell me about this base's construction?" Dan had spent weeks studying Craxi engineering. The whole facility is built on a network of maintenance tunnels. They're too small for Craxi, but we could move through them. "Amy, how long before the Vorth reach us?" 20 minutes, maybe less." Jake nodded. "Sam, get the men ready to move. We're abandoning this position." "Sir?" Sam looked confused. "General, Vexthul said to hold Sector 7. He said not to retreat from our position. He didn't say we couldn't advance." Within 10 minutes, the humans had disappeared into the tunnel system beneath the base. They moved through passages that had been designed for maintenance robots, crawling through spaces that would have been impossible for the larger Craxi soldiers. When the Vorth reached Sector 7, they found it empty. A massive insect-like creatures swarmed over the abandoned outpost, their razor-sharp claws tearing apart the defensive barriers. But there was nothing there to kill. Meanwhile, the humans were moving through the underground network like a virus spreading through a body. Dan Williams had mapped out the entire system, finding connections that even the base engineers had forgotten about. "There," he whispered, pointing to a maintenance shaft that led up into the main power station. "That's our target." The Vorth assault was focused on the base's outer defenses. They attacked in waves, throwing themselves against the Craxi positions with mindless fury. The aliens were fighting exactly as they always had, meeting force with greater force, trying to overpower an enemy that seemed to have no limit to its numbers. But while the main battle raged above ground, the humans struck at the enemy's weak point. Amy Rodriguez led a small team through the ventilation system into the heart of the Vorth formation. They found what Jake had hoped they would find, a cluster of larger creatures that seemed to be directing the assault. "Command nodes," Amy whispered into her communicator. "The smaller ones are following orders from these big ones." "Can you take them out?" Jake asked. "Working on it." Amy and her team had spent weeks learning to work in spaces too small for normal combat. They moved through the air ducts like deadly shadows, striking at the Vorth commanders from angles the creatures couldn't defend against. The effect was immediate. As each command node was destroyed, the Vorth in that area began to lose coordination. They still fought, but without direction. Some turned on each other. Others wandered aimlessly across the battlefield. At the same time, Dan Williams was leading his own mission. He had rigged explosive devices from standard maintenance equipment, creating bombs that were far more powerful than anything the Craxi had expected humans to produce. "Structural weak points identified," he reported. "If we can bring down these support columns, we can collapse the entire eastern approach." "Do it," Jake ordered. The explosions sent shockwaves through the base. Massive stone pillars that had supported the defensive wall for decades came crashing down, creating a barrier that even the Vorth couldn't cross quickly. General Vex Still watched from the command center in growing amazement. His tactical displays showed the impossible. The Vorth advance was slowing. In some areas, it had stopped completely. "What is happening?" he demanded from his officers. "The humans should be dead by now." "Sir," one of his subordinates reported, "the humans are not in Sector 7. They appear to be everywhere." Sam Foster was coordinating the human forces from a hidden position deep in the tunnel network. He had established communication with all the human teams and was directing their movements with a precision that impressed even himself. "Team Alpha, move to grid reference 12. Team Beta, hold position and wait for my signal. Charlie Team, you're clear to advance." The humans were fighting a battle unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They didn't try to match the Vorth's numbers or the Crax's firepower. Instead, they used speed, surprise, and coordination to strike where the enemy was weakest. When Vorth forces concentrated in one area, humans would appear somewhere else entirely. When the creatures adapted to one type of attack, the humans would switch to completely different tactics. Private Kelly Brown found herself crawling through a water pipe that ran directly under a Vorth staging area. She planted explosive charges with shaking hands, knowing that discovery would mean certain death. "Charges set," she whispered into her communicator. "Get out of there, Kelly," came Sam's voice. 30 seconds to detonation. Kelly crawled faster than she had ever moved in her life. Behind her, the explosions collapsed the staging area, burying dozens of Vorth under tons of rubble. By dawn, the impossible had happened. The Vorth assault, which should have overrun the base in hours, had been stopped. The creatures that had terrorized the galaxy for decades were retreating in confusion. General Vextel stood on the command deck, staring at his tactical displays in disbelief. His forces had held, but not because of Craxi strength or superior firepower. They had won because of the strange tactics employed by creatures he had dismissed as weak and worthless. Jake Morrison emerged from the tunnel system covered in dust and exhaustion. His uniform was torn, his face was black with smoke, but he was alive. Around him, his soldiers were climbing out of maintenance shafts and ventilation ducts, looking like they had been through hell. "Report," General Vexthul demanded. "Mission accomplished, sir," Jake replied. "Sector 7 is secure." "Sector 7 was overrun hours ago." Jake smiled grimly. "No, sir. We were never in Sector 7. We were where we needed to be." "The Craxi." General stared at him for a long moment. "Your people fight like no warriors I have ever seen." "We fight like humans," Jake said simply. As word of the victory spread through the base, the Craxi soldiers looked at their human allies with new eyes. The small, weak creatures they had mocked were responsible for the first decisive victory against the Vorth in decades. But Jake knew this was only the beginning. The Vorth would be back, and next time they would be ready for human tactics. His people had won their first battle, but the war was far from over. Still, As he watched his exhausted soldiers celebrating with their alien comrades, Jake felt a surge of pride. They had proven that humans belonged in this galactic war. Now they had to prove they could win it. 3 weeks after the battle at Talos Prime, Field Marshal Kefler arrived at the base unannounced. He was the supreme commander of all coalition forces, a legendary warrior who had fought the Vorth for over 30 years. His ship was twice the size of any vessel Jake Morrison had ever seen. Jake stood in the landing bay with General Vextel, watching as the field marshal's entourage disembarked. Keflar was even more imposing than the other Craxi leaders, with golden armor that marked his rank and scars that told the story of countless battles. "Field Marshal," General Vextel said, bowing deeply, "this is an unexpected honor." Keflar ignored the greeting and walked directly to Jake. "You are the human commander." "Colonel Morrison, sir," Jake replied, unsure whether to salute or bow. "Your species has accomplished something that seasoned Craxi warriors could not," the field marshal said. "Explain how." Jake had been dreading this conversation. How could he explain human tactics to beings who had never needed to think creatively about warfare? "We used the terrain to our advantage, sir. We struck where the enemy was weakest. The Craxi have fought on this world for 5 years, Kefler said. We know every stone, every tunnel, every weakness in our defenses. Yet you found ways to use our own base against the enemy that we never considered." General Vextel stepped forward. "The humans employ tactics that are unconventional. They do not fight as we would expect." "Show me," Kefler commanded. Over the next several days, Jake found himself giving demonstrations to the highest levels of Coalition command. Amy Rodriguez explained her hit-and-run techniques to groups of fascinated alien officers. Dan Williams showed Craxi engineers how human modifications had made their weapons more effective. But it was Sam Foster who made the biggest impression. He was asked to brief Coalition commanders on human military psychology, and his explanation left the aliens stunned. "Craxi fight as individuals," Sam explained to a room full of senior officers. "Each warrior is strong and skilled, but you fight alone. Humans are weaker individually, but we fight as a connected unit. We share information instantly. We cover each other's weaknesses. We think as one mind." The aliens struggled to understand this concept. In Craxi culture, strength was individual. The idea of deliberately making yourself dependent on others seemed like weakness. Dr. Lisa Grant arrived from Earth to help explain the science behind human capabilities. She had been monitoring the situation from the orbital stations and had prepared detailed reports on human performance. "Human brains are wired differently than yours," she told the assembled Coalition leaders. "We evolved to solve complex problems quickly. We see patterns where others see chaos. We adapt faster than any species we've encountered." Field Marshal Kefler listened to these explanations with growing interest. "If this is true, why did your people seem so weak when we first met them?" "Because you were measuring us by your standards," Lisa replied. "You looked for individual strength and advanced technology. You missed our real advantages." The turning point came when Kefler decided to test human capabilities in a different setting. He assigned Jake's people to several different Coalition fleets, spreading them across the war zone to see if their success at Talos Prime could be repeated. Amy Rodriguez was sent to the 7th Fleet, where she was assigned to work with Admiral Vexlen, a veteran commander who had fought the Vorth for decades. The Admiral was skeptical about working with humans, but willing to try anything that might give him an advantage. Amy's first assignment was to analyze Vorth attack patterns in the Admiral's sector. She spent hours studying battle reports and enemy movements, looking for patterns that the aliens had missed. "Here," she said, pointing to a star chart covered with tactical markings. The Vorth always attack the strongest positions first. But if we pretend to be weak in one area while secretly reinforcing another, we can predict exactly where they'll strike. Admiral Vexlan studied her analysis. This is possible, but how do we make them believe a position is weak when it is actually strong? Amy smiled. Leave that to us. The next Vorth attack in the Admiral's sector played out exactly as Amy had predicted. The enemy struck at what appeared to be the weakest point in the Coalition defenses, only to find themselves caught in a carefully prepared trap. For the first time in his career, Admiral Vexlan achieved a complete victory with minimal losses. Meanwhile, Dan Williams was working with the Coalition's engineering corps, developing new weapons and defensive systems. His innovations combined human design principles with alien technology in ways that neither species had considered before. The problem with your weapons, Dan explained to a group of Krexi engineers, is that they're designed to overpower the enemy. But what if we designed them to outsmart the enemy instead? His new weapon designs were smaller and lighter than traditional Krexi equipment, but far more versatile. They could be quickly modified for different situations, adapted to local conditions, and used in combinations that confused enemy targeting systems. Sam Foster was perhaps the most successful of all. He was assigned to train Coalition officers in human leadership techniques, and his methods revolutionized entire military units. Your soldiers follow orders because they must, Sam told a class of Krexi commanders. Human soldiers follow orders because they understand why those orders matter. When a plan changes, Krexi units need new orders. Human units adapt automatically. The results were dramatic. Military units that incorporated human training techniques became more flexible, more creative, and far more effective against the VORth. Captain Jake Morrison found himself promoted to general and given command of the Coalition's first integrated human-alien forces. His mixed units performed better than anyone had expected, combining Krexi strength and technology with human adaptability and tactics. The success stories spread throughout the Coalition. Worlds that had been on the verge of falling to the Vorth suddenly began reporting victories. The Swarm, which had seemed unstoppable for decades, was being pushed back for the first time in living memory. But the most important change was in how the aliens viewed humanity. The contempt and dismissal were gone, replaced by genuine respect and curiosity. Field Marshal Keffler called Jake to his flagship for a private meeting. The massive warship was a monument to Krexi military power. But even here, Jake could see human innovations being incorporated into the design. Your species has changed everything, the Field Marshal said. The war that we thought was lost may now be won. We're just getting started, Jake replied. Give us time to really study your technology, your tactics, your enemy. I think you'll be surprised what humans can accomplish. Keffler studied him carefully. There are those in the Coalition who believe humanity should be given full membership status immediately. They argue that your contributions have already exceeded those of species that took centuries to prove themselves. Jake felt a surge of pride, but also responsibility. We didn't come here to prove ourselves, sir. We came here to survive. But if we can help others survive too, then maybe that's worth something. It is worth everything, Keffler said quietly. As Jake returned to his quarters, he thought about how much had changed since that first meeting on New Horizon Station. Humans were no longer seen as weak or primitive. They were partners in a galactic war, bringing unique capabilities that no other species possessed. But Jake knew the real test was still ahead. The Vorth had been surprised by human tactics, but they were learning. The enemy would adapt, just as humans had adapted. The next phase of the war would require everything humanity had to offer. Looking out at the stars, Jake felt both excitement and fear. Humanity had proven they belonged in the galaxy. Now they had to prove they could help save it. The communication system chimed, and Amy's voice came through clearly. "General Morrison, we've just received intelligence reports about Vorth movements in the outer systems. I think you're going to want to see this." Jake smiled grimly. The war continued, but now humanity was no longer fighting just to survive. They were fighting to win. 1 year after first contact, General Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Coalition flagship watching the most important battle in galactic history unfold. The Vorth home cluster lay ahead, a collection of dead worlds that the swarm had consumed and turned into breeding grounds. "All ships report ready," came the announcement from Admiral Vexlan, who now served as Jake's second in command. The alien had learned to trust human judgment completely after seeing the results firsthand. Jake looked at the tactical display showing thousands of Coalition ships arranged in formations that would have been impossible under old Craxi doctrine. Mixed human-alien crews operated vessels that combined the best of both technologies and tactics. "Amy, what's the status on infiltration teams?" Jake asked. Sergeant Amy Rodriguez, now Colonel Rodriguez, responded from her position commanding the Special Operations Forces. "All teams are in position, sir. We've identified 37 Vorth command nodes throughout the cluster. When you give the word, we can take them out simultaneously." "Dan, are the new weapons ready?" Colonel Dan Williams checked his engineering reports. "The hybrid systems are functioning perfectly, sir. We've got surprises the Vorth have never seen before. Sam, how are the crews holding up?" Colonel Sam Foster managed morale and coordination for the entire fleet. "They're nervous but confident, sir. The mixed crews are working better than anyone expected. Humans and Craxi are starting to think alike." Jake nodded. A year ago, these same aliens had considered humans too weak to be useful. Now they were trusting human leadership in the most critical battle of the war. The Vorth response was immediate and overwhelming. Millions of the insect-like creatures poured out of their hive worlds, creating a black cloud that blocked out the stars. Their ships were grown rather than built, organic vessels that could repair themselves and adapt to enemy weapons. But Jake was ready for them. "Execute Operation Chessboard." He ordered. The Coalition fleet scattered in all directions, breaking into hundreds of small groups that moved independently. To traditional military thinking, it looked like chaos. The Vorth pursued what appeared to be fleeing ships, spreading their forces thin as they chased multiple targets. But the human plan was more complex than simple retreat. Each group of ships was following a carefully planned route that would bring them back together at precisely the right moment. The Vorth were being led into a trap that spanned multiple star systems. Amy's infiltration teams struck first. They had spent weeks sneaking onto Vorth worlds using captured enemy ships and modified Craxi technology. When the signal came, they destroyed command nodes across dozens of planets simultaneously. The effect was immediate. Vorth ships that had been moving in coordinated formations suddenly began flying erratically. Some turned on their own forces. Others simply stopped moving entirely. "Command structure is fragmenting," reported Dr. Lisa Grant from her position on the analysis team. "The Vorth are losing central coordination, just like we hoped." Anne's weapons modifications came into play as the Coalition forces regrouped. The new hybrid guns could change their energy signatures rapidly, making it impossible for Vorth ships to adapt their defenses. Every time the enemy adjusted to one type of attack, the weapons switched to something completely different. The Vorth had evolved to be the perfect predators, but they had never faced prey that could outthink them. Their adaptation abilities, which had made them unstoppable for centuries, became a weakness when faced with weapons that changed faster than they could respond. Sam Foster coordinated the fleet movements with a precision that amazed even Jake. Ships from different species, with different capabilities and communication systems, moved together, like parts of a single organism. The rigid hierarchy that had once defined coalition forces had been replaced by flexible cooperation. Wave 2 incoming, announced a Craxi sensor operator. Vorth are sending everything they have. Let them come, Jake replied calmly. Amy, initiate Phase 2. The second phase of the human plan was even more audacious than the first. Instead of meeting the Vorth fleet in open battle, the coalition forces dove directly into the enemy formation, using speed and maneuverability to strike at individual ships. Before vanishing back into the chaos dot, it was three-dimensional warfare on a scale the galaxy had never seen. Ships fought above, below, and through enemy formations. Human pilots, with their superior reflexes and pattern recognition, led mixed crews in dances of destruction that left Vorth commanders completely bewildered. "Sir," came Amy's voiceover, "the communication system. We've reached the primary hive world. Beginning final assault." The climax of the battle took place on the Vorth's most important breeding world. Amy led a combined force of human and alien soldiers through the organic corridors of the massive hive structure, fighting their way toward the central control chamber. The Vorth fought desperately to protect their nerve center, but human tactics proved decisive once again. Where the aliens saw only chaos and violence, humans saw patterns and opportunities. They turned the Vorth's own tunnel systems against them, using the confined spaces to neutralize the enemy's numerical advantage. Control chamber secured, Amy reported after what felt like hours of brutal fighting. Dan, you're clear to proceed. Dan Williams and his engineering team had been waiting for this moment. They had developed a virus that could be introduced into the Vorth central computer, a hybrid of human software design and alien technology that would spread throughout the entire swarm network. Uploading now, Dan announced. This is going to shut down their coordination permanently. The virus worked better than anyone had dared hope. Across the star cluster, Vorth ships began shutting down or turning on each other. The swarm that had terrorized the galaxy for generations was tearing itself apart from within. Jake watched the tactical display as red markers representing enemy forces winked out one by one. In less than 6 hours, the coalition had achieved what decades of conventional warfare had failed to accomplish. "Sir," Sam Foster said quietly, "the Vorth are requesting surrender." Jake could hardly believe what he was hearing. The species that had never shown mercy, never retreated, never surrendered, was asking for terms. "Tell them we accept their surrender," Jake said. "But they withdraw from all occupied worlds and submit to coalition monitoring." The aftermath of the battle was almost anticlimactic. The Vorth, without their central coordination, simply stopped fighting. Ships that had been instruments of destruction became confused and directionless. The swarm that had consumed entire civilizations was finished. Field Marshal Keffler contacted Jake from his command ship. "General Morrison, the coalition owes humanity a debt that can never be repaid." "We didn't do this alone, sir," Jake replied. "This was victory achieved by all of us working together." But Jake knew the truth. Human innovation had been the key that unlocked victory. The ability to see patterns, adapt quickly, and think creatively had turned the tide of a war that had seemed lost. 3 months later, Jake stood in the Great Assembly Hall on the coalition capital world as President Helen Carter signed the Terra Accords. Humanity was now a full member of the galactic community, with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. "A year ago," President Carter said in her address to the Assembly, "you saw humans as weak and primitive. Today, you know better. Strength isn't about size or advanced technology. It's about the courage to face the impossible and find a way to make it possible." The assembly erupted in cheers from dozens of different species. In the audience, Jake could see Amy, Dan, and Sam, along with hundreds of other humans who had proven that, Earth's children belonged among the stars. As Jake looked out at the gathered representatives of galactic civilization, he thought about the journey that had brought them here. Humanity had started as the weakest species in the coalition. Now they were partners in building a better future for everyone. The war was over, but Jake knew this was really just the beginning. Humans had found their place in the galaxy, not through conquest or domination, but by showing that different ways of thinking could solve problems that had seemed impossible. The universe was vast and full of challenges, but Jake was no longer worried about humanity's ability to face them. They had proven that being human was not a weakness. It was their greatest strength.